Good evening, virtual audience, and welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Hillary Carr, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm very pleased to introduce this event with AYAD AKHTAR presenting his new novel, Homeland Elegies, joined in conversation by JOSHUA FERRIS. Thank you to the Cambridge Public Library for co-sponsoring this event, and thank you all for joining us virtually tonight. Through virtual events like tonight's, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to our community and our new digital community during these unprecedented times. Every week, we'll be hosting events here on our Zoom account. As always, our event schedule also appears on our website at harvard.com/events, where you can sign up for our email newsletter and browse our bookshelves from home. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our speakers at any time during the talk tonight, click the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get through as many as time allows. In the chat, I'll be posting a link to purchase Homeland Elegies on harvard.com, as well as a link to donate in support of this series and our store. Your purchases and financial contributions make events like tonight's possible and help ensure the future of a landmark independent bookstore. Thank you for showing up and tuning in support of our authors and the incredible staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always. And finally, as you may have experienced at virtual gatherings these past few months, technical issues may arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them quickly, and we thank you in advance for your patience and understanding. And so now I'm so pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. AYAD AKHTAR is a novelist, screenwriter, and the Pulitzer Prize winning playwright of Junk, Disgraced, The Who and the What, and The Invisible Hand. In addition to the Pulitzer Prize for Drama, he's won numerous awards, including the Steinberg Playwriting Award, the Nestroy Award, and the Erwin Piscator Award, as well as fellowships from the American Academy in Rome, MacDowell, the Sundance Institute, and Yaddo. He's also the author of the novel American Dervish. He currently serves as a board trustee for PEN America, and it was recently announced that he will become its president starting in December. Tonight, AYAD is joined by Joshua Ferris, the award-winning author of Then We Came to the End, The Unnamed, and To Rise Again at a Decent Hour. These two will be discussing AYAD's latest novel, Homeland Elegies, which was named one of Time's most anticipated books of the fall. The New York Times said that it's a beautiful novel that has echoes of The Great Gatsby and that circles with pointed intellect the possibilities and limitations of American life, and that Akhtar's thinking is informed by wit and banked anger. And The Guardian said that it's hard to convey the breadth and brilliance of this work. Exploiting his skills as a playwright and essayist, as well as novelist, Akhtar depicts an immigrant family's experience of the American dream through a son's relationship with his father, and dissects the erosion of truth, decency, and hope in a nation shaped by debt and money. We're so happy to have them here tonight. So without further ado, the digital podium is yours, Joshua and AYAD.
Thank you, Hillary.
Thank you, Hillary.
Hi, AYAD.
Hi, Josh. Are we live?
How are you?
I'm good.
I think we're live.
I see.
I don't know.
It's
nice to see you.
It's good to see you too. It looks like there's a Harvard Bookstore sign.
I think that's Hillary.
See it.
That's just Hillary.
Oh, the audience.
There we go. Okay, gotcha. I had the wrong screen. Good to see you, John.
Oh, I think I do too then, because I see that as well. Hold on 1 second. Let me see if I can't see you in a better way. There you are. All right, let's start.
Okay. For doing this.
You know, I'm really looking forward to this, man. You know, people talk about in COVID times they've been isolated for like 6 months or something, and for me it's like 22 years. You know, so this is very exciting for me. It's a big deal. I put on fresh underwear and socks for you.
You got a nice shirt on too.
Thanks.
You're the handsomest guy in
I want to start. Can I go ahead and describe your book for
please.
Everybody?
I'm having a tough time with that. So please, yes.
Well, I'm not sure I'll do it well. It's a big discursive, extraordinary novel. I mean, I found myself reading it all in one manic blaze, and it read to me with the same kind of ease and eloquence as a Roth novel before that, you know, maybe Bellow, some of the early Europeans, this extraordinary force of penetrating insight and eloquence. And I'm just delighted for you. I'm proud to be your partner tonight in conversation. It's a book by one AYAD AKHTAR, about one AYAD AKHTAR, who shares a hell of a lot in common with its author. He was born in 1970 on Staten Island. Shortly thereafter, he moves to suburban Milwaukee, where he's raised by his mother and father. His father, Sikander, who does not, interestingly, share his name, I think, with AYAD AKHTAR, the novelist's father, was a cardiologist who once treated Donald Trump and became eventually a big booster of his during his presidential run, to AYAD the writer's total dismay. His mother is racked with cancer in this novel. She has, I think, 4 recurrences, and is not as keen on the American dream as AYAD's father. And she has a lot of doubts about whether or not the move from Pakistan was the wise one. AYAD also introduces us to his aunt, who teaches literature and argues against Salman Rushdie's, perceived insult against the Prophet and against Islam. He introduces us to his friendship with a venture capitalist who makes a ton of fortune selling and buying debt. This individual is also a Muslim American who is not entirely after making money in his exploits. We meet a girlfriend who gives him syphilis, and even more humiliating, drops him for a white boy named Blake. Never want that. And to his father's late life trials, actual trial, as he defends himself in a malpractice suit, which is really eating him up financially and making an alcoholism problem even worse. And in between all of that, which come in kind of discrete episodes, we have a book that is full of confusion and searching and rage and tenderness and heartbreak. It has penetrating analysis of our current political moment, exposure of injustice of all kinds, but especially anti-Muslim American racism after 9/11, sex and lust and male ambition, power struggles. Power struggles always are occurring like almost on every page and every scene. And the conclusion finally, after an enormous amount of big-hearted and rhetorical feints and battles and discourse and penetrating insight, we have the conclusion that AYAD belongs in America because it's the only home he knows. It's his homeland. And well, and this is me speaking, we need you here to write books like this one. So I'm enormously pleased to be here with you, man. I think this is just a great achievement.
Joshua, thank you. I love that description. I mean, it's not only accurate, it actually makes it seem really sexy.
Well, minus the syphilis.
Minus the syphilis, yeah, it's true. It's true. Yeah, it's true.
I want you to walk me through how this book.
So that's a comic section. So.
Oh, it's very funny.
Yeah.
It's very funny, and we'll get into whether or not we should even go there.
Yeah.
We can go there. I'm not afraid of going there. I mean, God knows I've had my.
God knows you've had
problems.
syphilis. Anyway.
I won't go that far.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even put that in a novel.
Yeah. Thank you. But thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think that to me is like, it's a very encompassing description that both does justice to the fragmented nature of what it is, but also the kind of through line of what it is. And, I often sort of, my shorthand is to say, I wanted to tell the story of my parents and their generation of immigrants and what happened to them and their kids in the 50 years that they were here. And what was the country that they came to? What was the country they believed they were coming to? What happened to that country in between? And where did it land? Where did they land? And what does that say about our country and what's happened to our country as told by one of their kids, a writer who's written about them, gotten into some trouble with them, and sort of like trying to fold the Philip Roth dimension of it. But your description is actually much, much better than what I've generally come up with. So.
Well, why don't you tell me?
It's a hard book to talk about because I'm trying to do so many things. I mean, it's like I'm trying to write essay. I'm trying to, economic analysis. There's family drama. There's comedy. There's long pages of dialogue between characters. It at points reads like a play. I mean, I'm trying to collapse all of these things. I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about formally was social media, and I was thinking about Twitter and Instagram and how all of these things, whether it's, plants and food, books, thoughts, quotes, they all coexist in this platform. You just keep looking, and there's a coherency to the experience of just scrolling, because it's all inside that platform. So within the platform of a novel, can't everything just be inside there? That was the idea. So.
Well, there's a lot of formal play for sure. Hopefully we'll touch on that, because I really am, I'm very interested in hearing a little bit about also what the difference was in writing this novel as opposed to, say, writing a play, why you didn't write it as a play. But first of all, just like briefly, you know, from my understanding, you wake up one morning, you're in Rome, maybe it's 2017, 2016, something like that.
2018,
you read a poem.
2018.
And what?
It was 2018, beginning of 2018, yeah.
You read a poem by Leopardi. It's addressed to Italy. It's quite grand. It gives you an idea for a voice. Take it from there. What happens next? You sit down and start writing?
Well, so I read the poems to Italy, and I was so inspired that that a poet could address his nation and his fellow Italians. And I was at the American Academy. I'd been invited there, and it was an amazing experience. But it was also like I was spending a lot of time reading a lot of classical stuff. I was reading Livy and Tacitus, and I was reading Machiavelli, and Newt Gingrich was across the street, and Donald Trump was in the Oval Office, and the country seemed to be going through some kind of a real shock. To me, it wasn't that much of a surprise in a way. At least the rot was something I had been writing about for some time. I'd been thinking about it for a long time. I read the Leopardi poem, and I thought, is there any possible way that I could summon a voice that would speak to the we that we no longer think ourselves to be as Americans? Could I cohere that? And of course, ridiculously grandiose thought, but I went to sleep that night. I woke up the next morning, and the prologue, the first sentence of the prologue was already sort of forming itself. And in the next 2 or 3 days, I wrote that prologue. So, and then one thing led to the next section about my father and Donald Trump came almost immediately off of that. And then the section about my mother. And, you know, for 11 months, I wrote into a kind of blind present, constantly informed by what I had just done, the past, and shaping this movement through this journey across the American landscape, across the heartland, across healthcare, across debt and finance, and across a whole cohort of Muslim American kids born to parents born there, you know, like Asha, the girlfriend you mentioned, or Riaz, the financier that you mentioned. So I knew I was painting this portrait of America, but I was also painting a portrait, or trying to paint a portrait of my generation, if you will, and I needed to have enough examples of that. So yeah, and the last thing I'd say about it is that, you know, there's little fragments of narrative, you know, like Riaz's dad trying to open a mosque in Scranton. I tried to write that as a short story 30 years ago. You know, and there were all these detritus, you know, the detritus of accumulated ideas over the course of a writing career, all these things that you think could be great ideas, and they just kind of fall by the wayside. They all found themselves in some odd way cohering in this book, that I would move from one to the next, and suddenly I was right in the middle of a story I'd been working on for years and years and years, but it taken on a new shape. So there was a freedom. What's that?
Some old things clicked.
Yeah.
This is the medium they needed to be in.
Yeah. I don't know why they clicked for the first time in this way, but they did. Yeah.
Well, that's very rewarding.
It was thrilling. I mean, I think writing the book changed me in some way. You know, I think I never had this craft before, the ability to do all of these things at the same time. And I think I told somebody that I don't know what I'm going to write now, because I feel like I've burned through a lifetime of kindling. So
what was it intuitive when you're going through, this is kind of a wonky process question, but when you're going through, was it intuitive to go into scene?
To go into,
and then was it intuitive to pull? Yeah, and then was it intuitive to pull out and go, okay, this is where I need to be, you know, talk about what's, you know, my interior. I mean, I noticed you do a wonderful job of synthesizing enormous amounts of time, but then after 10 years will pass in a paragraph, then you'll go into a scene that will extend to, you know, a full page, sometimes 2 pages, where there's an extrapolation of time. And I'm imagining an even longer conversation than you might have had in real life. And so there's this there's a feeling of real intuition on the page.
Yeah, well, I think the intuition that's what I mean by craft. I never had the craft to do that before. the craft to sort of move in and out of scenes so fluidly. And also, you know, it was interesting in writing, I would realize that it was like toggling between vibrancies or registers of emotional experience. I would realize that I was in a discursive mode, and that discursive mode at a certain point needed to be interrupted sharply. And the sharp interruption needed to be immediate and personal. And so the attack into the scene would be immediate. And sometimes it would mean that I couldn't resolve the discursive thing, or I couldn't resolve the scene if I was getting out of the scene. And it was also the first time as a writer that I thought, so what? It doesn't matter. I don't have to resolve it. I don't care. I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to keep going with what, I guess, yeah, that's right, what you're calling an intuition. I'm going to keep following this through. And I did have to do some revising at the end, but it was really much, much less than I would have imagined. I mean, I think my agent and my editor were very, they were instrumental in being supportive and not asking me to revise it too much. I don't, you know, I wouldn't have known how to revise it because it came out of me as this thing, you know, this eel that it's hard to hold on to.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds like the problem has been all along you've been writing plays.
Maybe.
But you did win a Pulitzer for us, so you're doing okay
I like
with that.
writing plays, Josh. I like writing plays.
Let me ask you this: so you've had some plays produced on Broadway. You've done well. You've written two. This is your second novel. Two novels. To what extent do you think that was all prelude to writing this novel, which is it's big and the subject is big. You called it grandiose, but let's just call it really what it is, which is grand. I mean, it is grand and it is elegiac. So. And maybe even, you know, before you answer, I want to ask to what extent all this was prelude to and preparation for Donald Trump.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I mean, Donald Trump is the kind of, he's the inspiration and muse of this book. His debt-filled commitment to ersatz, his ersatzness, his individualism on steroids, his, you know, all of that, that's the animating principle of the book, is the idea of America as somehow enabling the dream of the individual and what the wreckage of that project is. I mean, it's on the first page. Mary Maroney lays out the argument on the first page, which the narrator doesn't understand at that time when she lays it out. But you know, I don't know about prelude. Yeah, I mean, I guess, yes. I mean, I don't know. It's just from an experiential point of view, I never had the craft to do this, to mix what I do as a playwright with what I can do as a novelist, but also what I can do as a screenwriter. There's a lot of visual feints and a lot of visual sort of stuff that I'm doing. And I'm blending all of that narrative thinking into one work. And I was never able to do that before, so.
Well, it's wonderfully alive. And so let's actually have a taste of it, man. Can you go to page 14 and read us just a little passage so that we get an idea of what it is that we're talking about? That actually the two passages that I had in mind.
Sure. What are the which one? 14? Where's
about third of the way down. My father supported Trump.
Yeah, third of the way down. My father.
Just read to the first couple of sentences on the next page.
My father on page 14, really? My father supported Trump.
Yeah.
What is
and
the?
It accounts for something no one understands. My father supported Trump's election.
Page 14 accounts for something nobody understands. Oh yeah, okay, gotcha. My father supported Trump's election, and he supported him well past the point that any rational non-white, let alone sometime immigrant, could possibly have justified to himself or anyone else. And yes, the blow-by-blow of father's enthrallment with candidate Trump, first nascent, then ascendant, then euphoric, then disappointed, then betrayed and confused, and finally exhausted, a gamut of intensities whose order and range are proper to the ambit of all addiction. Yes, a granular account of father's addiction, his ceaselessly shifting emotions, his evasions and avowals and disavowals, the steady shedding of his civility, the daily obsession, the ad hoc rationalizations, all this might be of value to note, to show, and in the process through this unlikeliest of American Muslim lenses, to reveal the full extent of the terrifying lust for unreality that has engulfed us all. Yes, it might be of value, but I don't know that I can bear to pen it. I love my dad. I think he's a good man. I can't bear to invest a writer's weeks and months, let alone years, on a portrait of my father as menacing dolt. And so an afternoon's glancing views will have to do. You want me to keep going?
No, that's good. Go to page 22 too, and let's pick up there. This is a wonderfully accurate depiction of the exasperation of watching a loved one enter a cult, essentially.
Yeah, you're right.
And perversely, in this case, because of the ways in which, well, the immigrant experience is not welcome in this country under Donald Trump. Go to page 22 and say, what was this attachment to the man?
What was this attachment?
I mean, this is.
Well, I was going to start reading.
Sorry.
It's okay. What were you going to say? What were you going to say?
No, go. You're good.
What was this attachment to the man? Was it really just the memory of the helicopter rides, the spacious suite, the hooker, a tailor's tape, a lapel pin? Could it really be so banal? Or were those things standing in for something else, something more encompassing and elusive? Father always called America the land of opportunity. Hardly original, I know. But I wonder, opportunity for whom? For him, right? The opportunity to become whatever he desired? Sure, others too, but only insofar as others really meant him. And isn't that what Mary was saying all those years ago, that our vaunted American dream, the dream of ourselves enhanced and enlarged, is the flag for which we are willing to sacrifice everything, gouging our neighbors, despoiling our nation, everything that is except ourselves. A dream that imagines the flourishing of others as nothing more than a road sign, the prick of envy as the provident spur to one's own all-important realization. Isn't this what Father saw in Donald Trump? A vision of himself impossibly enhanced, improbably enlarged, released from the pull of debt or truth or history, a man delivered from consequence itself into pure self-absorption, incorporated entirely into the individualist afflatus of American eternity? I think Father was looking for an image of just how much more his American self could contain than the Pakistani one he'd left behind. I think he wanted to know what the limits were. In America, you could have anything, right? Even the presidency. In America, even the presidency. If an idiot like Trump could get a hold of it, couldn't you? Even if you didn't want it? After all, the idiot apparently didn't want it either. He just wanted to know he could have it. Or maybe the emphasis there needs to shift. He wanted to know he could have it. Yes, I think that's right. Elsewhere.
That's just.
All right, so I'll stop there. Yeah.
That's wonderful, rousing stuff. And, you know, I think that what happens in this book is that the reader encounters these local, they go off like little landmines, these little local truths, and the thing that makes you go, yeah, brother, tell it, you know, and it feels as if you're capturing something that has eluded us, especially when you turn to art. It's very Donald Trump, the subject of Donald Trump is extremely elusive, and you grab it. And a couple things happen. First, I just want to say, it's not even really a question. It's just like, it doesn't just capture a Muslim American man's perception of what, you know, the American dream might be through Donald Trump, but it really captures a man's naked ambition to slough off all of his mortality and weakness and, you know, crap personality and assume this kind of, as you say, ersatz, but nevertheless very seductive notion that you are as all-powerful as this clown has proven himself to be. If a clown like him can do it, why not a clown like me?
Yeah, right. That's right. And the father character in the book is, you know, there is a clown aspect to, you know, I like to think of him as, I mean, I always feel like when I first encountered Falstaff in Henry IV, Part 1 and 2, I connected to Falstaff because, in a way, so much of my dad, there was so much of Falstaff in my father, you know, that, and of course, Falstaff is a clown fundamentally. There's something fundamentally comic about the posture of at least the father in this character, in this book's his experience and his portrayal. There's something fundamentally comic about it.
Well, right or wrong, good or bad, both of those characters, the father here and Falstaff, they have enormous amounts of life in them.
Yeah,
I think Shakespeare says at some point like that he was the source of humor in other men, and to some extent, he, you know, the father here is this like the source of American love, You know, I mean, he's tarnished, he's travestied by America, but he is really the source of love. It's where this book finds the counterpart to a lot of the son's criticisms.
Right. That's right. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yes. And what the father goes through in the book is hard, but I feel like, you know, his difficulties with money, his difficulties with belonging, his difficulties, you know, holding on to what he believes it can be his American identity, or he continually wants to be American in a way that I think eludes him, even though I don't think he always understands that, you know. But yes, it's right. It's a counterpoint, and it keeps the dream, the positive dream of America alive throughout the book. Again, it is a counterpoint against the narrator's criticisms. It's very astute, I think. Yeah.
One of the things that happens when you're reading along, as I say, these local truths explode like landmines, and they keep you convinced that this is utterly true. And it completely erases the seams between fact and fiction, which we know are there, because even though we've got a narrator who's named the same name as the writer, it's labeled novel. I'm assuming that people want to know what's true and what's not.
Well, you and I know, when you read an early draft of the book, I sent you an email and I asked you, I had this little disclaimer that I was going to put in the front of the book, and you advised me to pare it down and keep it as simple as possible. I mean, because I worried that folks were going to be, you know, and I had a review, one guy who said, I've known this guy a long time, I've admired his work, I followed his work, and you know, I've even had a meal with him, and you know, he keeps a good secret. I didn't know that his dad was Donald Trump's doctor, that he has a half-sister sired by a hooker in Queens, that he had syphilis, that he's made millions of dollars, not because of anything to do with his playwriting. And I mean, it's like, that's a review. I mean, so it's like, I'm not sure what the review is exactly, but so I did worry that literal readings of the book were going to foreclose metaphorical and literary readings. I mean, obviously, everything that happens in the book I'm asking readers to hold it to a different standard of truth, the standard of metaphorical truth, that it's saying something larger, not merely anecdotal or merely prurient or merely actual or merely particular to me. None of that would be of any interest. I used the memoir form, and I collapsed fact and fiction because it felt like one of the things that I wanted to do was mirror the confusion that we're dealing with now. It's mimesis. I'm an artist who wants to imitate life. And what does life feel like right now? Well, life in this country politically feels like confusing. And now a good story and dramaturgy has taken over for critical thinking. You know, entertainment is the paradigm for politics as well as thought. So in that landscape, how to write a serious philosophical novel that had the thrill of reality TV, right? So that's the gap. Those are the polarities that I'm trying to play with all the time, if that makes sense. I don't know.
I would imagine it also lets you pull with ease and kind of effortless, you know, almost at will, very arbitrarily, if you wish, from things like CNN and Bin Laden and 9/11 and big things that normally take place on that screen, but that here you're using as part of the fiction writer. You know, the fiction writer is usually sort of small and talking about his heart or something, you know, and here you've sort of like, you're able to you deploy these huge historical forces at will. And it must have been a great deal of fun, but it also, you're kind of giving yourself permission by blending fact and fiction to basically make this very demotic, very of the world.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I wanted the book to have the teeth to include that stuff. I wanted it to have enough of a bite to sort of take in what you're talking about, not just be a private book. I wanted it to be a public book as well, a book about our public life. So, yeah.
I wonder also if, you know, there is a little note, at least in the ARC, and this might not be in.
Yeah, in the RC there is, but there isn't in the.
Something about seeing clear, you know, you morph the facts to see clearly and to to see more clearly. You deform reality to see more clearly, something like that.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's helpful as a process, but then I wonder also that as a product, when you have a book that's a novel as opposed to a piece of nonfiction, the product, it doesn't have to prescribe cures. It works as a piece of art that could be completely useless to society. It could be irrelevant to anything that's going on politically or historically. And so there's a way in which I'm sure you were looking at it as a process. Let me play with this stuff to make my point and to convey in the most potent way possible what it is that's on my mind. But then later on, you don't have to then prescribe the way that things should be different or whatever, which is really not in the artist's makeup. It's not in the novelist's wheelhouse, or really something that, we're built to do, essentially.
Yeah, I think I didn't want, I think that's exactly right. I don't have an answer to anything. I mean, I in a way, part of the feeling of having the craft to do this was no longer having the anxiety to have an answer or even to know what the conclusion would be. How could I stay in the vivid middle? The craft was about accepting that the vivid middle was all that I needed to know how to do. I could just, and that, I talk about it, my father talks about it at one point in the book where he talks about a match. When you don't know who's winning, that's the moment of greatest intensity or heightened intensity. And when you do know who's winning, then you don't care as much anymore. It's really the same thing in narrative. I think that when you know what the outcome is going to be, it's less engaging than when you are inside the not knowing of what the outcome is. And a lot of times as a writer, I actually don't know what the outcome is. And being able to stay inside that not knowing is what made all of this moving around possible. But that does mean that you get to the end of the book and there is not a solution to the political quandaries, to the sort of philosophical pitfalls that America seems to have fallen into. And maybe at the end of the book, the narrator suggests even, 150 years ago, Whitman was saying the same thing, really. So the extent to which the narrator seems to be making a case about America today, well, people have been saying this for quite some time. So.
Well, I think, one fewer person telling us how to live our lives is, it's always welcome.
Yeah, right. It's true. It's true.
Let's see, what else do I want to ask? I want to ask you to read another little passage, if that's okay. And it's actually two passages, and one just for the sheer delight of it. It's on page 54, and it's actually just the footnote. And I want you to read this because I think it's just so great. So.
Okay. When I was in college, Surah Al-Muzammil would end up on my reading list for the Meccan unit of my Islamic studies class in the history of the Quran. I recall sitting in the first floor reading room of the university library, looking up from the pages of the translation we'd been assigned, catching hold of the image of my uncle, whose name was Muzammil, and that's why I'm talking about this. Catching the image of my uncle turning in our guest room bed, mixed and mingling with the picture of the person who ever since childhood had always been the prophet to me, because Al-Muzammil is the prophet being addressed by God. So that image was itself some version of a person I'd known who had no connection to the prophet whatsoever. He was a man I'd seen as a very young boy in my father's village, whom my father seemed to love. We were by the village well, they were laughing, then they hugged. I remember the green scarf tied to this man's head, the long black mustache above his lip, a booming laugh, his joy released. I remember looking up to see a metal pail pouring water into an earthenware jar as large as I was. For some reason, this man I would remember being called Toffee, though my father recalls no such person. I can't tell you why Toffee somehow became the prophet in my mind, but he did. Whenever my mother or her sisters or her mother would tell me tales of the prophet, I saw Toffee in the role, which meant my every thought of the prophet was dressed in some version of that green scarf and handlebar mustache, not to mention ringed with a liquid, unbridled joy.
I just love that, man. It's so tender. It's the sweetest account that I've ever heard of the prophet. I mean, I'm sure the prophet needs no rehabilitation, but I wish that a couple of Trump supporters could read that about the, I think they would really feel very tender toward the prophet here, that's after reading that beautiful passage. But now I want you to read one more
Sure.
passage on page 67 that kind of dovetails with this nicely.
Which page?
67.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
After Mahfouz is complaining about Salman Rushdie's decision to insult the Prophet's wife in the satanic verses, and you and your Ayad's and Ayad's aunt are having a discussion about this, and this really dismays Ayad because he thinks, well, of course he had license to do this. He's written a brilliant book, and I don't understand where this complaint is coming from. And then he brings in this quote from the Paris Review about Mahfouz's complaint. So you can read us about that. So start there at the end of that 67.
So start at the end of the quote, or do you want me to include the quote?
I don't think we need the, I mean, you can if you want, but it's basically,
Mahfouz talks about the fact that he doesn't believe Rushdie has the right to insult the Prophet, basically. So, so I read that, I have that quote, and then it says, Mahfouz's response pointed to an enduring fact of so much Muslim intellectual life, a lasting sense that the Prophet is sacrosanct, that his status as a model of holiness and virtue in all things is not to be disputed, and therefore that the demonstrable pruning and cherry picking of the sources in support of what on greater study could only be seen as a fiction, curated for effect, that this process of constructing the Prophet's identity is not an acceptable subject for public discourse. And finally, and most odd to me, that time spent on the thorny matter of the Prophet's historicity is taken as evidence not of one's interest in truth, but rather as one's craven dependence on the West, which, one is summarily scolded, does not itself have left any sacred symbols of its own, and therefore mars and makes mockery of the only such symbol still unsullied by the destructive cynicism and faithlessness of the European Enlightenment. Some version of a similar argument was offered in support of the eternity of the Quran and its status as the preeminent voicing of the Godhead in human language. I find both positions only more and more perplexing with the years, especially as with each successive reading of the Quran, it's become only clearer to me how indebted it is not only to the time and place in which it arose, but also to the psychology of the one whom I cannot but see as its author, Muhammad. For Muslims, to speak of Muhammad as the author of the Quran is a surpassing blasphemy. You want me to stop?
Yeah, no, keep until the end of the parenthetical.
Muhammad was just a holy stenographer, if you will, taking divine dictation.
Okay, so wow, this is hot stuff. It also sort of includes within it why I think it kind of like why this book is fiction, because it might all be fiction, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a subtle, but yes, that's right. That's exactly right. I mean, to the extent to which I have anything to say about myself, I mean, not to get too postmodern about it, but whatever I relay to you about my experience is it's my interpreted version. I mean, somebody else might say something very different about an interaction that I have, that I report to you. And what I'm reporting to you is it's like Derrida says, every interpretive act is an act of autobiography. I'm telling you about what I think I am. And so it's, in the same vein, there is a way in which the narrating of the self, which is central to this book, and which is of course central to our era, our moment, where the self is constantly curated on these platforms. It's the Instagram sort of mise en scène of my life, or the Facebook mise en scène of my life, which is always a fiction, but that fiction is what is actually acting and doing on people's consciousnesses. So yeah, that's exactly right. It's exactly right.
Now, however, not everybody has maybe your education in postmodernism. It takes this shit very seriously.
Yeah.
So on a related but diametrically opposed note, do you ever worry that writing about real life in this way will get you dragged into the real world in an all too real way, the way that Rushdie did?
I hope not. I had a sort of a aunt, not an actual sort of aunt by blood, but an aunt by a familial sort of friend of the family, call me after she read an early copy. She read the ARC, and she sent me an email, can you talk? And so I called her, and she said, it's a wonderful book. I really liked it very much, but you need to take out all this stuff about the prophet. And I said, why? She said, well, because you're going to get some trouble and you don't need it. And anyway, it's not true what you're saying. So I was like, what do you mean it's not true? So it's just an ongoing, thing. I don't think she thinks there's going to be a fatwa, and I doubt there will be. I don't do anything all that controversial, but yeah, it's a very sensitive moment. I think Muslims and folks the downtrodden across the world and in this country are justifiably sensitive about what people say about them. And it's hard to dissociate the anger that insults to the prophet occasion from the long history of being under the boot of the colonial West. They are the same thing. So the second I sort of begin to articulate some of these historical arguments, I become an ally of the colonial West, and I'm putting my boot on my own people, if you will. That's how it gets interpreted. It's not what I'm doing, but
it's Roth. It's Roth in a way. I mean, it's a reprise of the accusation that Roth was providing comfort to the enemy.
Yes, that's right.
To some extent.
Yeah. No, that's exactly.
There's also constantly in this book, there's a power struggle. And the key for me in that passage that you just read is not just the acknowledgement of the differing views that you have between, received enlightenment from God and stenography, creating the possibility of a fiction that is equal to in its conception of the world as yours in Homeland Elegies, but crucial to it is the mention of the West and how the West's oppression creates a certain sensitivity that makes you want to go, well, what the Prophet Muhammad is saying is true because I don't like you, or something like that, because I'm fucking angry at you and what the shit you do to me. And yeah, I might actually agree with this dude's book, but I can't deal with it right now, so fuck you, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no,
there's a power structures. These struggles are constantly coming up in this book, whether it be with Mary Maroney's students or the dude, the auto
repair shop
garage, who's totally screws you and uses his morality. Morality is frequently used in this book to get the upper hand over somebody with a little bit more, with an edge, basically.
Yeah, totally. That's exactly right. I don't have anything to say to that. It's a brilliant analysis.
Well done. We're gonna have to go to some questions, I think, in a minute.
Okay.
I think, right? We're into it by about 45 minutes. So, but let me just end on this little note. Somewhere, both Nietzsche and Kanye West have said expressed in their own ways, that they're grateful for the ways that they've been made to suffer, because it's brought them their art. It's provided them with the content of their lives that they fashioned into art of some kind. I'm assuming that some of these experiences, if not in kind, in degree, have happened to you with your experiences as a Muslim American.
Sure.
Are you grateful for that? I mean, I've often looked at a playwright like August Wilson, who takes into everything that I have to deal with as a man, all of the shit and the burden and the terror. I mean, you should feel really bad for me right now. The burden, the terrible, all this stuff, he takes it into account. But then on top of it all, he also has to deal with racism. He also has to deal with the historical burden that I never will have to. But it also seems like he makes art out of it. He makes beautiful art out of it. And I would think that in a perverse way, he's grateful for that suffering. I just wonder if that's something that you feel yourself.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's funny, Josh. I don't think I've ever thought of it. I must feel that way. I remember when I was in high school and I was really obsessed with the Police, and then I was obsessed with Sting. And there had been this book that came out about Sting. It was, one of those sort of celeb, fan books, and fan biography is a really silly little thing, but I remember him saying in that, if you want to go make art or you want to write great songs, go out and get some suffering, because that's where it comes from. And I really remember being shocked and surprised by that. But yeah, I think that's probably true. I mean, I'm grateful for the love that I have of literature and storytelling, which my high school teacher, when I was 15, instilled in me, that has kept me going through all the hardship. As you know, being a writer can be really hard, even though it looks at this point, you know, I'm doing okay, I'm doing well, and looks like everything's great, but it was a long time getting here to any kind of stability. And love of literature and storytelling, and ultimately wanting to be a writer and not being a writer for a very long time because I wasn't very good for a very long time, and working to get better. The love kept me through all of that. And so I guess maybe I'm grateful for that love. And then what that love allows me to do is, to transform some of the stuff that is hard to deal with. But, you know, it's years and years and years of, you know, I did an interview today with a radio show, and I kind of lost it a little bit. You know, it's just like, you can't, you know, we're 19 years after 9/11, and the guy's asking me, so I think what you might be trying to say is that it's been hard for Muslims after 9/11. We're 19 years into this. And you know, we've destroyed the world order because of our response to 9/11. And you're asking me if it's hard for Muslims after 9/11? Like, I kind of lost it on the radio shows. A nice guy in central Wisconsin, and probably didn't need the barrage that I you know, but you know, at a certain point, you're just like, I don't know what to say anymore. So I'll write a book. I'll write a book where I'm able to craft the scenes and channel some of that emotion that never seems to be able to be released. 19 years and we're still talking about this? Are we? Who are we? I mean, I don't even understand what we're doing. So anyway.
Well, Jay Shalat would like to thank us both for the great talk, and he wants to know if you think that form is political.
Yeah. Sure. I think so. I think it is. I mean, I think the dominant narrative forms these days, I think that the dominant narrative commercial literary forms serve a certain purpose, and they can certainly be the repository of certain political points of view. And I think often, you know, moving away from some of those forms can be a political statement. I don't know if in the case of this book that the choice of being formally inventive is a political choice. I'm trying to rupture the reader's expectation. I want the novel to be able to do things that it has done in the past, but tends not to do these days for whatever reason. I want to think in the novel. I want to tell. I don't want to just show. I want to, So I think it can be political. I'm not sure I'm intending the formal stuff politically, but it can be for sure.
Someone else wants to know, was it hard to present this book to your family when the lead bears your name?
My mom had passed away before I wrote the book. That's part of what got me going, actually. And then my father, I figured, would probably read it, but then my dad, I don't know if I told you this, Josh, the day that, you know, that long chapter at the end of the book about my dad in the court case, or my dad in the court case, my dad actually ended up in ICU the day that I finished that chapter, and then died shortly thereafter. So he never got a chance to read the book. So my brother has read it, but he's not in it. So, it hasn't been hard yet.
You have aunts, though. You have uncles, cousins, those kind of folks. Are they readers? Are they? We're
gonna find out. You know, I have a cousin who read it. She liked it. She knew my dad quite well. She liked it a lot. She said, "Oh, it was interesting to see this blend of fact and fiction. I recognized so much of my uncle, and I also recognized where you were moving away from who he was." So.
Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit to be seen.
Yeah, exactly.
Another question here says, you talked about being able to work ideas into this that you would try to write about. many years earlier. Do you have a method of organization for old stories or pieces in progress, or any advice for writers starting out that are frustrated by stories that aren't quite working yet?
I think that's a great question. I think coming to an organic process of archiving and an organic process of keeping ideas organized is an important stage of craft, actually. You know, I think that in my case, the stories that stuck around and found their way were stories that had kept coming back, almost like a gravitational pull. They just kept coming to me, and I would keep trying, I would keep thinking about them, and they go, and it's, that's never going to happen. Nothing's ever going to happen with that. And then it would come back again. But yes, I do have a way of, in this particular case, in the case of this book, I wrote everything out on note cards. So if I had ideas, whatever idea I would have, I would write it out on a note card. So if I remembered an idea like the idea I was talking about from 30 years ago, I wrote it on a note card. And I kept those note cards in a big pile. And then I would just work through the pile as I was writing. I would have the piles all around me. I'd have various note cards and an idea here and snippets of dialogue and all that stuff that would just get, it would just collapse into the present, the writing present. So.
You also do, I know this about you, you at least at one point in time, a lot of dream recording. I mean, you put this in the book too. So yeah, you're always kind of like, you're filtering through your real life and putting it down.
Yeah,
I think, right?
That's the discipline. You know, it's a way of knowing. Writing is a way of knowing. You don't often know things until, you know, you can't know certain things about a story until you're writing it. That's been my experience.
You also sometimes need those 10 or 20 years of distance between the event or the experience and the digestion of it. Sometimes things just take that long. And you know, when a writer is sitting on an idea and it's a good idea and the writer knows it's a good idea, it's got lots of this and that's to it, and you can't wait to get into it, and for whatever reason it's not working out. It just doesn't have the right, it's not the right vintage, weirdly, you know, and it's I ultimately think that the only thing separating that writer from writing his or her story exactly the way it should be is the decision to quit. You know, 5 years later, that person's not working anymore. 10 years later, that person's not writing anymore.
Right.
And if that person persisted and simply was still around 10 years later, that story would get told. So I really think the only separation between, the only organization you really need is one of time.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. I've been fortunate. I didn't give up. I often get the question, young writers, you know, what advice? Just keep doing it. Just keep doing it. There's no other advice.
I mean, it's it.
That is it.
It sounds terrible, but it's it, because it's like, you know, it's the same way with life. You do it and you go for it and you throw everything at it until you take your last breath, and then it's over because you don't have any. It's the same way. Should be the same way with writing. You got to throw everything at it until they take it away from you.
How many years has it been since your last book? Speaking of time.
I published a book of stories in 16, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but my last novel was published in 14, so it's been 6 years.
And you just finished a book.
I did.
Yeah, which I read. Yeah. It's really good. What's it called?
A Calling for Charlie Barnes.
Say that again?
You're plugging it. A Calling for Charlie Barnes.
Yeah, it's a good title.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've come to the end. Is there anything else you want to say about your awesome book?
Buy it, please.
For anyone that is out there who has not bought it yet and has not read it, hopefully you gathered that I would strongly encourage that, because it's just terrific.
Thanks, Josh. This was such a pleasure.
It was a pleasure to watch as well, guys. This is wonderful. Thank you so much. And a tremendous thank you to both of you and Joshua. And thanks to all of you out there for spending your evening with us. You can learn more about this important book and purchase Homeland Elegies at harvard.com. And on behalf of Harvard Bookstore here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, have a good night, keep reading, and everybody, please, please be well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Josh. Bye.
You're welcome. Bye, Hillary.
Bye.